Well, the interesting thing, 1982. Let me just give you a little bit of background. I was involved in doing the Jolly Roger with Charles Cole, round to the right, a little bit farther to the right on the wall than where Wings of Steel goes up. At that point in time, Tony Yaniro and another fella had done a little probe going up a couple of pitches. There weren't really that many people active in wall climbing then who were interested in hooking and in pushing the limits of hooking very far. A lot of the established climbs like the Sea of Dreams and things like that had hooking, but they had enhanced hooking. Neither Charles nor I found that to be acceptable. So pushing the limits of hooking from where we were sitting involved using what's there, taking falls when things tore off, but not reaching for a drill and helping the placements or enhancing the placements. So there really wasn't, despite what Richard likes to portray as this race to climb this thing, I was probably the only person that would seriously even have contemplated going out there. It's 1,200 feet. It's pretty free of features. There's really not a lot to go for out there. And after 1982, the following season, I showed up in Yosemite. My partner was up on one route. Most of my rack was up on another route. And I spent a lot of time in the meadow looking up at El Cap. And I picked out 8 separate lines that hadn't been climbed. I came back and did 3 or 4 of them. But there was a lot of unclimbed rock still in the mid-'80s, even though wall climbing and exploration had been in kind of a lull. So the great slab over there, because it was low angle, off vertical, clearly for most of its duration until it runs into the arch, which forms the dihedral wall and horseshoe, there hadn't really been a lot of serious exploration. Bridwell's route of the Aquarian was over to the left. There's obviously a big expanse of rock there that didn't have any climbs on it beside Yaniro's short start. So there was not a lot of interest, not a lot of discussion about running a route up that way. It was quite obvious that it was either going to involve a lot of really horrendous hooking, but no matter what approach you were going to take to it, and it was going to take a lot of bolts to be even remotely reasonable. The standard at that point in time was A5, which is a 50 to 60 foot fall, and it only really takes 30 feet of protection that won't hold or lack of protection to generate that kind of a grade. Clearly, when you're falling down slabs, it's not as desirable as falling through the air if you're going to be tearing stuff out or taking long falls with no intervening protection. Reading Richard's book, Wings of Steel, he makes it sound like there was just a lot of competition for that thing and that people were just going to get on it. And if he, having spotted the route and having fallen in love with the idea of doing a route there, if he didn't act quickly, somebody else was going to grab this. I wasn't going to do it. I really don't think anyone else had much of an interest other than the fact that there was clearly not a route there, and it was a big blank area. I don't think there were more people thinking about free climbing over there, kind of dreaming about it than thinking about aid climbing over there. It was clearly going to be a lot of hooking because there just is not a lot of features. And they're just not, the only real taker for that climb probably would have been me at that time. So as far as time pressure, as far as any kind of competition to get up this thing, I think that's a bit of a fallacy. If it had been me and I went up there and did an interesting or a good job, no, I wouldn't have been criticized. No one's going to say, why did you choose to climb in a particular spot? They are going to want to know how you did it. And I do have to make this very clear. Charles Cole and I, by taking if you drill it, fill it, old school approach, we're in the minority at the time in Yosemite. Most of the other people that were climbing and putting up routes at that point in time took more of the Bridwell approach. So to represent my approach to climbing as being very mainstream and very much the accepted norm is not accurate. we did that for our own reasons. Everyone makes those choices about style and how you're going to go about doing things. And you have to live with that. What you decide on the ground that you're willing to do or not willing to do on this climb, or any particular climb, is what stays with you. Looking back at the routes I've done, I know that I've done my best. And I've sit and weighed every hole that I've drilled, every decision that's been made on these climbs, and it gives me deep satisfaction. I have a hard time imagining where Jensen and Smith are. The 3 routes that they put up on El Cap are very dependent on drilling and percussive force. And because they've danced around this stuff, it's a kind of an ignoble fate. You can't change the past. It's hard not to take it personally. The way he's portrayed it as the community being against him, the rescue site guys, of which I was one. I was on the rescue site, was part of the Valley Elite, if he wants to call it that. It does get personal because there's a tradition of your best effort, the resources there. People want to hear stories about climbs being pulled off in bold and daring ways and done well. That's what lasts. That's what gets respected. Jensen and Smith wanted to be respected just for simply having survived their climb. And there was a lot of talk at the time. When they got shoved off over into the aquarium, finally, storms came in, and they were in a pretty bad way up there. And there was a lot of talk at the time, if the call comes out to rescue these guys, we're not going to do it. We're gonna let them meet their end up there, and that's pretty harsh. Anybody else wouldn't have taken that position, because we were there to help climbers in need, whether they're incompetent, as they generally tend to be, whether they're folks that have just had something bad go on. We're there to go and help them out. Let them try again. Let them come down, do something else, live another day. Now, unfortunately for Ammon, he chose to use a Talon hook and file it down to a very sharp point rather than stick to standard issue narrow Leaper Logan hook, which is what these guys reported comprised 145 of their 154 placements, as reported in their book. The load angle on those 2 hooks is not the same. The Leaper Logan sits against the rock. It's got a really favorable angle. If those guys were drilling to suit for that hook, that's Ammon's choice of hardware changes that. It has a much worse load angle because the hook sits up, and once you decrease the contact area, the tip pressure is so intense that it tends to just dust the rock out. So when I started hearing when they came down and were making reports early on, and we were getting progress reports on this climb, I was just shaking my head. It's like, you're taking lots of falls here unnecessarily. Why you have the book with you? Why aren't you using what those guys used? That way, if for no other reason, then if you can't get something to work, then you had what they had. Then you can reach for a drill and enhance. And he was trying to do his best not to do that, of course. But when you're talking about a tiny little drill dimple for the tip of a hook like that, winter ice and all kinds of other things can destroy those things. Clearly water will sit there. So it was always a question and always a vagary. Well, were these hook placements even there anymore? And that's really what makes this kind of climbing so miserable in a sense is, you're groping around looking for something that's, barely there. And if Jensen and Smith reach left, reach right, the only way you can see that stuff is to grope around for it, try to find the spot, find the dimple. That kind of climbing is just not technically engaging if you're somebody that likes the challenge of being able to work with what the rock offers. Any little bump can become a viable hook placement that way. And again, if they were honest about it, they wouldn't be in hot water with this thing. But
and Ammon has not necessarily come out and say that he has agreed that all these things were enhanced, or that he didn't seem to find as many. as has been reported that people have thought.
That's very, I mean, how do you tell? You know, it was very easy for me 2 years after the ascent to swing over and see white drill marks on the rock on pitch 9. That was easy enough. Okay, here's one. Rappel down a little bit more. Okay, here's another one. It's like shaking my head. These guys, you know, they probably did this all the way up. You also have to understand, a little bit of side note here about Dwayne Raleigh, who's the publisher of Rock and Ice magazine. In '82, I did the Jolly Roger with Charles Cole. Dwayne Raleigh and Tom Cosgriff, who also did Arctic Seas, were the first party to come and attempt the route. Neither Charles or I enhance doctor holes, doctor placements, do any of that stuff. And I was following these guys. It's like, wow, Dwayne and Tom are going to go do our climb. This is cool. So they got up to the base of the Gold Doubloon, which is inside the heart recess. At the time, bona fide A5 pitch, one of the steepest pitches on El Cap, if not the steepest pitch on El Cap. And they decided to come down. So when they did, I walked up to Dwayne and said, Dwayne, you know, how about it? How was it up there for you guys? And Dwayne looked at the dirt and shuffled his feet a little bit and said, nah, it was okay. And I looked at him like, okay. You know, if you led any of the pitches that I led on this climb, you'd be on fire right now. That is some wild ass climbing. Well, Alex Lowe and Rusty Reno, before they took a 100-foot fall on a free climbing pitch there, were working on the route, the lower part of it, and came back into camp and went to Charles Cole, my partner on that climb, and said, hey, Charles, you know, what's with the battock holes? What's with the drill holes? And Charles went, what? You know, I didn't do that. Steve doesn't do that. You know, we're both in clear agreement. We didn't do any of that on this climb. Either the hook placements were there or they're not. So the light came on. Okay, I get it. Now I start understanding why Dwayne was not so excited about their effort up there, because they had buggered the route with a drill. They'd reached for a drill down low on the climb. The first drill hole showed up on the second pitch. But these guys were accomplished masters in their estimation, too good to quit until they really got up into it and started realizing, oh, okay, now we're into the really hairball stuff here. I think we might be outmatched on this climb, and they came down. Dwayne has never apologized for that. He's never said anything. Dwayne and Tom had just put up the Arctic Seas route on Half Dome. And they came down, and Doug Robinson was writing an article for Outside Magazine that made Dwayne Raleigh a household name. This is one of our greatest climbers here. Look what these guys did. They went and put up a new route on Half Dome with a handful of bolts. Seen through an old school lens, that's incredible. You guys climbed this thing with just a handful of bolts. I think it was a couple of dozen for a grade 6 wall. That's just mind-blowing. Well, Doug, to his unfortunate discredit, didn't ask them what they actually did do up there, which is entire pitches of chiseled copperhead placements, lines of drilled hook holes that start nowhere and end nowhere. And I know this because I went to the party that did the second ascent of it, John Barbella. Same thing. I was quite curious about these guys now, considering what they had done to our climb. And I went over to him and I said, John, you know, how was it? What was that route like? And he looked me right in the eye and he goes, it was a piece of shit. So the light came on with Dwayne. And I've been very vociferous about my displeasure with Dwayne Raleigh here for, again, not being honest. You know, if he'd have said, God, we got up on this thing, we were running into a hard time, we drilled a few holes, I'm really sorry about that, we'd have had a different situation. I could have, expressed my displeasure, but the fact that he couldn't do that puts him in the same camp with Jensen and Smith on Wings of Steel. It's a lack of honesty about what you're doing. He shouldn't have let Doug publish that article either. So Dwayne comes in as editor of Rock and Ice, and publisher of Rock and Ice, and sees this story. He's been following all the back and forth on the Super Topo. You know, and I've been holding the line. There will be no redemption here. Kate and Ammon are gonna climb this thing. It's gonna go pretty much like I said. They will find pretty much what I said they were gonna find. So, cover story: Wings of Steel, El Cap's hardest. Is redemption close at hand? Well, the obvious answer is no. But Dwayne's got a job to do. He needs to sell copy, so he's going to work this whole thing up. It's really unfortunate that people need to overreach and try to make themselves out in a way that's more than what there is. And the problem with the article that came out, Dwayne Raleigh would have really, I think, liked nothing better than to have been vindicated on this thing. Here I am just giving Jensen and Smith no end of grief and trouble for the way they were climbing and how they were going about doing this stuff. It wouldn't really have done Dwayne Raleigh any good for Ammon to have come up and said, look, this thing is 75% drilled. It's very hard. The question I haven't asked those two is, in your estimation, give me a range. So we count 30 or 40 clearly drilled placements. But the other ones, the rest of the hook placements, of which there, by Jensen's account, 154, how many of those do you feel were created with a drill or a chisel? So they're really, they're quibbling down at the bottom end on that whole thing. In my mind, Jensen said 10%. I quipped at one point in time, I think I'm more comfortable with 90% drill enhanced, but I was just giving him a bad time because we'd been locked in this conflict for so long. Ammon and I locked horns on the issue of speed climbing and hammering. My wife at one point in time posed a query to him, said, look, Ammon, in the interest of going fast, are you pounding on routes that you wouldn't otherwise pound on if time was not an issue? And Ammon wouldn't answer that, but he wrote her offline and said, look, are you trying to start some shit here? And tried to throw his weight around as he perceived it at the time. And I read this, said, you're going after my wife here. I'm not going to allow this to happen. So I jumped on him pretty hard. And I'm a bit of a hard ass on the Super Topo forum. If you read some of the stuff I post, I hold a pretty hard line on this stuff. And so we kind of got into it for a while. He and I going back and forth on this level of rush bashing, as I was calling it. Because, look, if you're going to compete on a stylistic basis for time, has to be a level playing field, has to be best style to date. So Ammon and I had locked horns over a route in Zion called Cosmic Trauma that he had done for time with Chris McNamara. And he had chosen, even though he knew the route went without pounding, to use pins in a couple of places to avoid, to get around some tricky spots that might have taken some time fishing in a nut. So I kind of said, look, this game you're playing, you're kind of making it up as you go here. You knew this route was clean. You were trying to post a time on it. So what happens if somebody comes up and does it hammerless, doesn't take a pin to help themselves save time here, and does it 5 minutes slower than you? If this is something you're trying to do, set this mark, then it needs to be a level playing field, at least on climbs that have been done clean. And there aren't so many of them. Cosmic Trauma was the name of this thing. So he and I went around and around and around on this stuff, and we came to an understanding. He and I understand each other now, I think, but it was tough love for him because I held his feet to the fire on this whole issue. There's not a lot of new routes to do in Yosemite. It's a very difficult thing for climbers to come in and make a mark there now. And the speed climbing that Ammon's doing is his way of doing something new and unusual. taking on adventure, putting some uncertainty into it. I have a lot of admiration for speed climbing. Climbing El Cap in a day is a big deal. It really is. That means you got your systems so refined that you can move along that quickly. Speed has always been a measure of competence on El Cap, and climbers, for as long as they've been playing that game, have tried to shave time off of previous ascents. If you can do a 2.5-day ascent of a 5-day route, like the North American wall, especially back when nailing was involved, yeah, that's a measure of your confidence. So people would try to go as quickly as they could, if that's their choice. Personally, speed doesn't matter to me that much. Adventure and what is required of you to rise to your best effort, deal with the uncertainty, deal with the fear, deal with staring serious injury or death right in the eye and moving through that is really powerful stuff. So it's very difficult for me to look at what Jensen and Smith did and not pity their effort in that they let themselves down, in my estimation. Climbing's frightening, and if you're looking at smashing into stuff, it really is tough. So while I have empathy for folks that reach for a drill, and I do, I just fill a hole with a piece of metal and try to push on as best I can. Everyone knows what their best effort is, but the problem is with it is you won't get there unless you commit yourself to that best effort before you even start up. And I don't feel like these guys did that on any of the climbs they did.